How does a man in a wheelchair, handcuffed, stripped of his documents, denied water, denied a phone call, walk into a courtroom 6 days later and dismantle 2 careers, 3 supervisors, and a deputy commissioner with a single USB drive? His name was Percy Sanchez. He was 57 years old, sitting in a wheelchair, holding a briefcase, on his way to defend a client in court. They put him in handcuffs instead. They took his documents. They planted evidence on his lap. They laughed about it. And then, in a courtroom in Minnesota, before a judge who had seen everything, Percy opened a briefcase and ended both their careers with a single USB drive. After this story, you will never look at silence the same way again. Because sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one who has been building the case against you all along. Before we proceed into this classical story, our goal is to reach 5,000 subscribers by the end of March. Please be a part of our founding members by hitting the subscribe button, and also let us know where our story lovers are watching from. In this new channel, we are giving special shout-out and recognition to our subscribers. Let's begin our story. The frost hadn't lifted yet. It was still clinging to the grass on Canton Way when Percy Sanchez rolled down the wooden ramp of his front porch at 1141 Lilbrook Street, adjusting the collar of his pressed blazer with 2 precise movements, the kind of movements that come from years of discipline, not habit. He tucked a manila folder of legal briefs across his lap, checked his watch. 8:44 a.m. He had time. He had a client. He had a life built from scar tissue and sleepless nights and 14 years of courtrooms, and he intended to keep it moving forward, one wheel revolution at a time. He did not notice the cruiser idling halfway up the curb. Officer James B. Sullivan had been watching Percy for 3 minutes before he opened the door. He couldn't name what he was looking at. A black man in a wheelchair, blazer pressed, briefcase on his lap, headed for the bus stop. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. But Sullivan had a particular kind of instinct, the kind that has nothing to do with danger and everything to do with power. He got out of the car. His partner, Officer George Schultz, finished his breakfast sandwich and followed. What neither man knew, what neither man could have known, was that Percy had been waiting for this exact moment for 3 months. "Sir," Sullivan's word came out like a door slamming. "Stop right there." Percy stopped. He placed both hands on the armrests where they could be seen. He tilted his face upward and made eye contact, calm, deliberate, unafraid, because in 57 years of living as a black man in Minnesota, he had learned that composure was sometimes the only thing between him and catastrophe. The cold air sat between them. The streetlights on Lilbrook had not yet clicked off. Somewhere behind Percy, a bus was pulling toward 5th and Marsh. He was going to miss it. He already knew he was going to miss it. "Where are you coming from?" Sullivan asked. His eyes were moving across Percy the way an appraiser moves across something he doesn't think is worth much. "My home, 1141 Lilbrook. I'm on my way to court. I'm an attorney. I have a client waiting." Percy nodded toward the folder. "I have a client waiting." Schultz had stepped around to Percy's left by now. He was broader than Sullivan, built low to the ground, with a jaw like poured concrete, and eyes that didn't scan the way careful men's eyes scan. They selected. He looked at the wheelchair, at the blazer, at Percy, and then he repeated the word, attorney, the way men repeat things they find ridiculous, slow, deliberate, letting the mockery breathe. "Sure you are." There is a particular kind of violence in that sentence, not the kind that leaves marks on the body, the kind that assumes, loudly, publicly, in the 8:47 a.m. light of a Minnesota street, that you could not possibly be what you say you are, that your blazer is a costume, that your briefcase is a prop, that your life and everything in it is something to be doubted before it is even examined. Percy said nothing. His hands remained on the armrests.
His face remained still, and somewhere under the lapel of his pressed blazer, a small recording device continued to capture every single word. Percy had clipped it there 3 months ago after a client, a 23-year-old named Marcus Webb, described a stop that sounded exactly like this one. He had filed a complaint. The complaint went nowhere. He had filed another. It went nowhere too. He'd sat with that for a long time, and then, one morning, quietly, without announcement, he had begun wearing the device. Not because he was afraid, because he was prepared. He thought about Marcus Webb now. He thought about the other 15 clients who described this exact street, this exact posture, this exact silence. A small, hard thing settled in his chest. Not anger, something older than anger. Something that had been waiting for exactly this.
Sullivan told Percy he matched the description of a robbery suspect. Percy asked for the description. Sullivan said he didn't have to provide it. Percy asked if he was being detained. Sullivan said yes. Percy asked for the legal grounds. Sullivan said suspicious behavior. Percy asked him to define it. Sullivan told him to stop being difficult. Then Sullivan reached down, no consent, no warrant, no hesitation, and snatched the manila folder from Percy's lap. Months of legal work, a client's entire future. The papers scattered across the cold concrete of Canton Way like something broken. "Those are privileged documents. You have no right." "Shut up," Schultz said it quietly. The quiet ones are always the worst. Then Schultz did something that would end his career, his pension, his freedom, and eventually cost the city $25 million. He reached into his own jacket pocket. He produced a small plastic bag. He held it up, looked at Percy, looked at Sullivan, and placed it on Percy's lap. "What's this?" Percy Sanchez had no idea in that moment how deep this corruption actually ran. Neither do you yet. Drop your theory in the comments right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens next inside that precinct is something no one is prepared for. They arrested him on narcotics possession. They did not help him out of the wheelchair. Schultz dragged the chair by one handle and tossed it into the trunk the way you toss luggage you don't care about. At the precinct, the intake officer processed Percy without looking at him, the practiced efficiency of a man who has learned that questions cost more than silence. Nobody offered Percy water. Nobody offered him a phone call for over an hour. His client's court appearance came and went. They put Percy in a corridor because the holding area had no ramp. He waited there for 40 minutes while 2 officers debated the logistics of his wheelchair with the disinterest of men managing a minor inconvenience. The fluorescent light above him buzzed the whole time. One of the ceiling panels was water-stained, brown at the edges, sagging slightly inward. He stared at it and thought about nothing and everything simultaneously. His client, a woman named Diane Cortez, 54 years old, fighting an unlawful eviction, was standing in a courtroom right now with no one beside her. Every minute Percy sat in this corridor, she was alone in front of a judge. He had promised her. He had looked her in the eye and promised her she would not be alone in that room. He closed his eyes for a moment, then he opened them. He could not fix what was already done, but there was something he could still build. When they finally brought him to record his statement, Sullivan leaned against the wall and said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, "Guess the wheelchair's not as handicapped as his judgment." Schultz laughed. The intake officer looked at the wall. Percy looked at Sullivan for exactly 4 seconds, said nothing, and in the small, quiet architecture of those 4 seconds, he was already counting counts: unlawful detention, evidence fabrication, ADA violations, failure to accommodate, denial of access, denial of counsel. He was already building the case, not the one they'd filed against him, the one he was going to file against them. The thing about building something inside you is that nobody can take it from you.
They can take your folder, your wheelchair, your dignity if they manage to reach far enough, but they cannot reach the part of the mind where the work lives. Percy had known this since he was 19. It was the first thing law school taught him that actually mattered.
The arraignment was Tuesday, Minnesota District Court. The Honorable Judge Dennis M. Markley presiding. Sullivan and Schultz arrived in their dress uniforms. They sat in the gallery side by side, unhurried, a kind of practiced ease in the line of their shoulders, the posture of men who had been here before and knew exactly how this went. A public defender, a plea deal, a conviction on record, a man made quietly smaller and sent back out into the world carrying the weight of something that was never his. They had done this before. Internal affairs records would later confirm that. 14 prior complaints against Sullivan, 9 against Schultz. Not one sustained. Not one. The gallery filled around them. The bailiff called order. Judge Markley settled behind the bench with the deliberate calm of a man who has presided over 23 years of human disaster and has learned to read a room in the first 30 seconds. He read this one in 15. The defendant's table sat empty. Then the door opened. Percy Sanchez rolled himself to the table. He opened his briefcase. He arranged his materials with the methodical focus of a man who has been preparing for this exact moment for a very long time. Sullivan's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly. Something crossed his face. Not alarm, not yet, just a small, involuntary recalibration. Judge Markley looked over his reading glasses. "Mr. Sanchez, are you representing yourself today?" "I am, Your Honor." Percy's voice was level. "I'm also a licensed attorney in the state of Minnesota, bar number 0047821. And before these proceedings go any further, I'd like to submit Exhibit A." Sullivan's face went very still. The stillness was a kind of answer. The USB drive was small, unremarkable, the kind of thing you could hold between two fingers and forget was there. Percy set it on the evidence table, and the courtroom went quiet the way rooms go quiet before a storm closes the last exit. Not silence exactly, but the complete suspension of ordinary sound. The ventilation system, the shuffle of feet, all of it paused. Judge Markley reviewed the submission. He nodded to the bailiff. The projection screen descended. 73 minutes of high-definition audio-visual recording beginning at 8:44 a.m. on March 14th, Canton Way, Minnesota. Every second from the moment Sullivan stepped out of the cruiser to the moment Percy was wheeled into the precinct corridor. Every word, every gesture. Schultz's hand in his own jacket pocket, the plastic bag, the placement. Sullivan's voice in the precinct hallway. Guess the wheelchair's not as handicapped as his judgment, preserved in perfect clarity. Percy Sanchez stood at the edge of everything. One move, and a $25 million reckoning was about to be set into motion. What would you have done in that courtroom? Comment below, and if you're not subscribed yet, you are about to miss the most important moment in this story. Judge Markley watched 11 minutes. He did not speak. The gallery did not move. Sullivan sat absolutely still, and the stillness had changed. It was no longer ease. It was the stillness of a man watching the floor fall out from underneath him and not yet ready to acknowledge the drop. When the judge finally looked up, his face carried the quality of a man who has seen something he cannot unsee and has made a decision in real time about what it requires of him. Bailiff. His voice was precise and quiet and final. "I am requesting the immediate presence of the precinct commander and the city's legal counsel. Officers Sullivan and Schultz are hereby placed on administrative notice pending full evidentiary review." He turned to Percy. "Mr. Sanchez, the charge against you is dismissed with prejudice.
The court apologizes to you. It was the last thing Sullivan and Schultz heard as free men for a considerable stretch of time.
The lawsuit Percy filed in the weeks that followed was not a lawsuit. It was an architecture. 16 counts: unlawful detention, evidence fabrication, ADA violations, civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. 1983, intentional infliction of emotional distress, failure to accommodate a disability during arrest and booking. Each count documented, each count time-stamped, each count on video. The discovery process opened something no one had expected, or rather, something no one had been willing to look at directly. Internal affairs records released under court order revealed a system, not two bad officers, a system, a department-wide architecture of complaint suppression, falsified incident reports, and protected officers cycling through precincts without consequence. 14 complaints against Sullivan, 9 against Schultz, 23 combined moments when someone had tried to say, "This is wrong," and 23 times the machine had looked the other way. Every one of those 23 complaints now had a new life. Percy had them all. 3 supervisors were placed on administrative leave during discovery proceedings. A deputy commissioner resigned. The city's legal team, faced with 73 minutes of unambiguous video evidence, advised the municipality in the plainest possible terms, there is no viable path to trial. The men who had scattered Percy's legal briefs across a cold sidewalk, who had dragged his wheelchair by one handle and thrown it into a trunk, who had laughed in a precinct hallway, those men sat down with their attorneys and were told, quietly and finally, that the evidence had made every decision for them. There was nothing left to defend. There was only the question of how much it would cost. The answer was $25 million, and it was only the beginning. On a Tuesday morning in Minnesota District Court, the same courthouse, the same building, different chairs, Judge Dennis M. Markley signed the consent decree. $25 million to Percy Sanchez, mandatory body camera reforms, an independent oversight board for officer complaints, a departmental training overhaul the city's legal counsel described as the most comprehensive since the department's founding. Sullivan and Schultz were not in the courtroom for the signing. By then, they were facing separate criminal proceedings, charges that grew directly from what the discovery process had unearthed: evidence tampering, civil rights violations, conspiracy. The press was outside, the cameras were outside, but inside the courtroom, the moment was smaller and quieter than people might have expected. Percy sat at the table. His briefcase was across his lap. He watched Judge Markley sign the decree with the same methodical calm the judge had brought to every proceeding. No theater, no ceremony, just the work being done correctly. When it was finished, the judge looked up and said simply, "Mr. Sanchez, the record reflects the truth of what happened." "It always did, Your Honor. They just didn't know I was the one keeping it." Outside, Diane Cortez, the client Percy had missed defending that Tuesday morning in March, was waiting on the courthouse steps. He had rescheduled her case. He had won it on the rescheduled date. She was holding a small paper coffee cup, and she handed it to him without a word when he came through the doors. He took it. The cup was warm. The morning was cold. Behind them, the cameras were calling his name. He didn't turn around yet. He held the cup. He looked out at Canteen Way in the middle distance. He let the silence have a moment. The reporters called his name twice more before Percy turned to face them. He did not raise his fist. He did not perform. He stood at the top of the courthouse ramp the same way he had stood at the top of every ramp, balanced, upright, still. 3 sentences. That was all he gave them. I was a man going to work. They tried to make me into something else.
The record speaks for itself. Then he descended the ramp, turned left, and disappeared around the corner of Canteen Way, just like he had every morning for 14 years, a briefcase on his lap and a folder of documents that told the truth about the world. What changed after that morning in March, after the device under the lapel and the USB drive on the evidence table, and the 73 minutes that dismantled 2 careers and a corrupt system, was not Percy. Percy was exactly who he had always been, a man going to work, a man building things that could not be taken. What changed was the city around him, a new oversight board, new accountability structures, new mandatory training built on the specific, documented anatomy of exactly what had gone wrong. 23 prior complaints that had been ignored became the foundation of an entirely new policy. The people who had tried to speak before Percy, without a recording device, without a bar number, without the particular kind of armor that years and preparation build, their voices finally had weight. That is what $25 million cannot fully measure, the cost of what was broken and the cost of what it took to fix it. Marcus Webb, the 23-year-old whose complaint went nowhere, the one that had first made Percy clip the device to his lapel, received a call that November. Percy had tracked down his case, filed a motion. The conviction was vacated 6 weeks later. Some things you survive don't leave marks on the outside. Percy Sanchez knew that better than most. He had built a career from understanding it. He had built a case from living it. And on a cold Minnesota morning, with frost still on the grass and the streetlights not yet clicked off, he had rolled down a porch ramp and set something into motion that 2 men with badges and bad instincts never saw coming. The quiet man, the one they overlooked, he had been keeping the record the whole time. Percy Sanchez finally understood. Some things you survive don't leave marks on the outside. If this story stayed with you, you know what to do. Subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell us in the comments, at what point did you realize Percy was 3 steps ahead of them the entire time?